Welcome back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We are assessing all things Ravens in the aftermath of a 23-16 defeat at the hands of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Luke, as much as you and I have talked about Harbaugh and Bisciotti and Harbaugh and Flacco and Lamar, there is a whole other side of the football, the defensive side of the football, which is I think, look, the Harbaugh-Bisciotti thing will take up a lot of the oxygen that the Flacco and Lamar Jackson part of the conversation doesn't take up amongst the fan base and who's saying what on the internet. But no one's down on Suggs or Weddle or Jefferson or what happened across the middle of the field because I think by and large the defense was the strength of the team in the early part of the season. But that's changed a little bit over the last month as well, and I know you want to take a little bit of time and talk about this defense right now.
It just hasn't been very good. And what's crazy is you'll look at the stats, and where do they rank? Statistically, they're still right at the top, and it's going to make people cringe and roll their eyes, at least in terms of yards. I want to say Dallas might be slightly better than them in scoring defense, looking at some of the numbers as we try to look back at Week 9. But I think for the first 6 weeks of the season and then get into the first 3 quarters of the New Orleans game, what did we say over and over? That the sum of the parts was really working out and really looked impressive, even though you wouldn't identify too many guys having a great career year. Maybe it's Darius Smith, and certainly had the big performance against Tennessee.
But it felt like Smith and Judon and even, at various points, the Bowsers and whomever they would put in there, that there would be some flash that you would say about all of these guys, wow, where are they going to be in Week 10 once Cincinnati comes to town? Man, they're going to be rip-roaring. We're going to have 5 guys getting after the quarterback anytime, plus the blitz packages, and we got lockdown on the edges now, and Smith and Marlin, and, all of that's kind of gone away now. And really, the question's about the middle of the defense, right? This has been feast, feast, feast across the middle, and that's been a theme, and the nose is bleeding. They can't stop it.
Yeah, and you just said it, and I think that's a really good descriptor for it, that it's not as though they've given up a ton of big plays, but, just look at what happened on Sunday. Third down conversions just killed them at several different long stretches of the game. You think about that second half drive to start the third quarter. Pittsburgh was 10 of 16 on third down, 1 of 1 on fourth down. And now, Eric Weddle was asked about this after the game, and he did note that Pittsburgh did a good job keeping themselves in third and manageable. And you do look at it, the third down conversions, 5 yards, 1 yard, 2 yards, 9 yards. So, okay, there was a third and long. 6 yards, 7 yards, 6 yards, 8
yards. As opposed to 2nd and 27 like the Ravens were in at one point after a penalty and a sack, right?
Yeah. Well, and Josh Dobbs throwing his first career pass on 2nd and 20. But the point is, and to what you were saying, they've just had so many issues over the middle of the field. Their linebackers can't cover. C.J. Mosley either just can't cover or, I think more so, isn't healthy. And not that he's a great coverage linebacker when he's fully healthy, but if he has some issues and then he's not healthy on top of that, it becomes a colossal problem. And their safeties, Eric Weddle and Tony Jefferson, they're high-priced, but are they really guys that are going to make a lot of plays for you? Doesn't seem that way. So they've just kind of been, you called it a nosebleed, you can call it paper cut, death by paper cut.
It's not even like picking the ball off. They're nowhere near picking. The only way they pick the ball off is if the ball goes off the shoulder pads of somebody or off the fingertips, because nobody's even making big plays. And I know, one point Weddle got the call on, coming in high and hard and defenseless and all that. They haven't had a lot of those kinds of plays to be adjudicated because they haven't been sort of Johnny on the spot so much. There hasn't been a lot of disruption across the middle.
Yeah, there really hasn't been. And
then when there is, you get a penalty, right? So, right? Welcome to the NFL in 2018.
Right. But to your point, now they did have some pass breakups on Sunday. Jimmy Smith had a couple. In fact, I think he wasn't great, but he quietly was better this week than he had been the previous 2 weeks, which, my goodness, you needed to be because the bar had been really low in those previous 2 games filling in for Marlon Humphrey. But I thought Pittsburgh did a really good job on some of those third and shorts. They called the slants, some of the rub routes, the pick routes. They did a really good job with that stuff, and the Ravens just had no answers for that. Their linebackers either were trying to blitz, and the blitz wasn't getting home, or they didn't drop quickly enough to be disruptive over the middle of the field. I mean, it was there, and it's been there, and it's been something that has been a problem even going back to last year. It's just, how do you combat it? And then the Ravens haven't been able to figure out a way how. And to your point, the pass rush hasn't gotten home. That 11-sack game in Tennessee, that's well and good, but how many sacks did the Ravens have since then? A couple. So, and takeaways, they haven't had an interception since Tavon Young's pick in the first quarter of the Cleveland game. I mean, that was over a month ago. So it really is concerning as far as what we've seen from this defense the last 3 weeks against quality opponents. And again, you don't expect to hold the Saints to 10 points or the Steelers to 10 points or Carolina to 13 points. You're going to give up points. This is the league in 2018. But, and this was something that we pointed out, and it felt nitpicky at the time, but they have 7 takeaways in 9 games. I mean, that's not very dynamic. That's not game-changing.
And they haven't been dropping 2 a week either.
Yeah. I mean, there have been some opportunities. I mean, I think back to the Carolina game. Weddle got his hand on a pass, and Christian McCaffrey made a great individual play for that touchdown off the deflection. So there have been a few instances of that, but they haven't forced fumbles at nearly the rate that they did a year ago, and they haven't had the interceptions. I mean, this team led the NFL in takeaways last year. I believe they were first in interceptions the year before. And we've talked about this. There is more luck involved in forcing turnovers than anyone cares to admit.
And as well as guessing and Ed Reed and freelancing and, seeing something that only Ed Reed could see pre-snap that would allow – literally, I mean, that's what made him special.
Sure. And look, I mean, Ed Reed's not a fair comparison to make to anyone, but my point is...
But that's how he intercepted 5 more balls a year than anybody else should over, 500 passing plays, right? Literally.
Sure. But that's not my point as much as there is some luck involved, but you do have to have plenty of skill as well, and they don't have that ball-hawking safety in the secondary, and their linebackers haven't been able to cover effectively, and they haven't gotten to the quarterback at nearly the same consistent rate. The sack totals the sack total looks really good. I mean, they have 28. They entered Week 9 leading the NFL, but 22 of those came against Buffalo.
Dude, this is a year where all these stats don't mean anything. The only stat that matters is 4 and 5. But I mean, it's amazing though. To your point, it is amazing. If you just looked at the chart, you'd say, "How's this team not 6 and 3?" Right? Or whatever. Right?
But the distribution of those sacks, it's been very lopsided. Like I said, 22 of their 28 sacks this year have come against Tennessee, of course, Buffalo, of course, and Cleveland, which the defense played really well in that game, other than 2-minute situations, and their offense scored 9 points. So, but what does that tell you? In their other 6 games, they have a total of 6 sacks. That's not good enough. So it hasn't been consistent. It's been very volatile. It's been very, just up and down. And to the point that we made even a few weeks ago before the defensive struggles began, it is very difficult to continue to play defense at a high level, statistically speaking, without forcing turnovers. There's either going to be a regression to the mean with your defense, or there's going to be a market correction, and law of averages suggest you're finally going to get some takeaways.
Well, you can only get off the field so many times on third down,
right.
I mean, that's really been the issue of the fatigue that I've seen here the last couple of weeks, which is these long, tedious drives that are just uncommon in the NFL at any point, and certainly you would have said it would have been impossible for Drew Brees to take 20 plays to come down the field and still not score, a couple of weeks ago. But it feels like that's what we've been watching, where the field's been tilted the last 3 weeks, literally.
No doubt. I mean, there have been lots of long drives, and I made a point in a previous conversation that Brandon Williams even said that teams aren't playing, quote, actual football against them anymore. It's a lot of this ball control stuff, slants and misdirection. I mean, Carolina did a great job with some of their misdirection and pre-snap movement, but they haven't been able to get off the field. And I'll say this, as much as people have beaten up the defense, they are really banged up right now. I mean, they are. And you can say it's excuse-making, but if guys aren't healthy, and if you don't think they're that good to begin with, like a lot of people talk about C.J. Mosley and debate whether the Ravens should invest a big long-term contract in him. And look, that's a very real debate. That's a very fair debate. But if you happen to not be much of a C.J. Mosley fan to begin with and think he's overrated to begin with, well, then what are you going to say when he's not healthy? And he missed most of this week of practice. He got hurt in last week's game. He had the knee injury in week 2. He's just not running well, and it's reality. If you have a bunch of guys that aren't healthy, and if you think they're kind of overrated anyway, well, then what do you expect is going to happen? They're not going to play better when they're hurt. So they are banged up. I don't think that explains everything. That doesn't excuse everything, to be very clear. I'm not saying that, but I just see a defense that doesn't have a lot of speed, still is lacking playmaking ability. The sack numbers overall look really good, but we know that that's been choppy how that's come. It's come in boatloads in a few games and not much in the other, whereas in a perfect world, if you have 28 sacks on the season over 9 games, you'd like to think you're getting, at least 3 or maybe 4 in most of those games, and you're going to have a couple games where teams get the ball out quickly, and that's going to happen. But if teams are getting the ball out quickly and you're not getting home with the quarterback, well, then you need to cover, and you need to be able to play effective press, and you need to play man, and the Ravens just haven't been able to do that with any level of consistency. They were always going to come back to earth over these last 3 games, knowing they were playing New Orleans, knowing they were playing Carolina, who's on a roll now, and knowing that Pittsburgh was firing on maybe not all cylinders, but more cylinders than they were in week 4, let's say that. So there was going to be some of that, and I do think this defense is better than it's shown over the last 9 quarters, but got to beat good teams, and that's kind of where the Ravens are right now. In general, they've beaten up on bad teams. They've beaten up on teams they should beat, other than Cleveland, and the teams that are better, teams that are, at this point, New Orleans is 7-1, Carolina is 6-2, Pittsburgh is 5-2-1 after beating the Ravens on Sunday. They're losing to the teams that are better than them, and they're where do they find themselves? Mediocre, and this defense, at least the last few weeks, has been very, very mediocre, and certainly hasn't been a difference maker for a team that really needed to win a couple of these games here recently. So you hope during the bye week that you figure some things out, you get healthy. I think the shine is off Wink Martindale a little bit after he was being anointed, and everyone was saying, well, they were so good to have gotten rid of Dean Pease. Well, Dean Pease wasn't there to beat up on Sunday, I'll say that much. So it shows that their issues go beyond just their defensive coordinator, and I think that's where you do put the onus on the players and some of the injuries, and then just some guys that just haven't been good enough, and some young players who
Eric Weddle's 33, Suggs is 36, right?
These are those 2 guys you just mentioned. Suggs, a Hall of Fame player. I think he's going to be in Canton one day, and I think the last few years have solidified that for him. Maybe not on the first ballot, but I think he will get there. And Eric Weddle isn't going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's going to be maybe not Hall of Very Good, but Hall of Good, let's say. He's had a really good run. Neither one of those guys are the player that they once were. Neither one of those guys are the player that matches up to their reputation or their resume at this stage of their career. So,
in the same way that Steve Smith was not that guy when he was here, but he was still pretty good and on any given Sunday. But You know what I've learned about 33 and 36? I'm going to say something profound right now that I don't ever say this. What I've learned over 23 years of this is 33 and 36 is different on November the 5th than it is on September the 5th. And these guys not playing in August and not running around in the preseason, it's because they probably only have 6 to 8 games of tread on them usually, unless they're named Tom Brady or named Roethlisberger, and he doesn't have to run around and have Terrell Suggs throwing forearm shivers at him as he once did in 2009 because they've changed the game in that way. And there's a lot of things at work here, a lot of things conspiring. But boy, oh boy, the audience is large, the noise is loud for all things Ravens here this week because there's no good news. I mean, there's nothing happy about any of this right now because it certainly feels like the Harbaugh-Flacco era is moving toward the end, which means that the Suggs-Weddle era is probably moving toward the end. And whatever a reboot would look like around here, Lamar Jackson now stands in the center of it. And I don't know that he's ready for that. I mean, it certainly doesn't feel like he's ready to go win 10 or 11 games next year. Doesn't feel like he's ready to come in and win 3 or 4 games in the next couple of weeks, which is why he's probably not going to be playing in that capacity. But I am wondering about my holiday trip to see my cousin out in San Diego, where the Chargers don't even live anymore, and they're finally good. I'm going to be spending Christmas with my family out in San Diego. That, Lamar Jackson might be the quarterback running around in a soccer gym, out there Christmas week because, they might be 6-9 getting. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. But this Cincinnati thing says to me, I'm guessing they're turtling up here and going to kumbaya their way into trying to beat Cincinnati and Oakland and take their chances going down to Atlanta, that maybe they can put the season back off of life support for the Buffalo Bills spot in the wild card derby, maybe. But to your point, none of this feels healthy. None of this feels good. None of this feels like this is going to be a good couple of weeks inside of this Alamo sort of bunker that's going to happen now with Flacco and Harbaugh and coordinators and coaches worried about their jobs, players. Along the line, this is what happens, man. This is the very fractured thing. I have not been in a locker room where every question at every locker was about should the coach keep his job. And that's the first time in 23 years I've been in a locker room where I've heard that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's a product of NFL Network report Sunday morning, and a lot of it's a product of look what's happened the last 6 years. Since Super Bowl 47, they've been to the playoffs once. They haven't been to the playoffs the last 3 seasons, and this will be season 4 if this current track continues. And at this point in time, it doesn't feel like this thing's getting better. From a context of a big picture, moving forward, what is the ultimate goal in mind? The ultimate goal is not to sneak in as the number 6 seed and be 9-7, like the Buffalo Bills did last year. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl. And do you really see this group, whether we're talking about the head coach, the coordinators, the quarterback at this point, at this stage of his career, and where he's been and how he's played over the last 3 years, and this defense that has aging pieces and doesn't necessarily have young, dynamic pieces? I mean, I think I'd throw Marlon Humphrey into that category. I think he's going to be that guy. I think he can be a legit number 1 shutdown corner. Beyond that, I'm not ready to say Matt Judon's going to be the next Terrell Suggs, or certainly not about Tyus Bowser. Tim Williams struggles to stay on the field. On the defensive line, I feel like the Brandon Williams contract really has kind of turned out the way that you feared it could have, meaning he's a good run-stopping nose tackle.
He hasn't been a dominating player, dominating player. That's all. We're not Hall of Fame, just dominating.
Sure. And even that.
Haloti Ngata's not going to the Hall of Fame, but he was, you noticed him all the time, every week.
Sure. But even, and I'm not trying to pick on Brandon Williams per se, but again, that was the philosophical decision. Are you going to invest that kind of a contract into a run-stopping nose tackle? He's never been a pass rusher. I mean, look at the sack numbers.
Right.
And I can tell you his PFF grade for pass rushing efficiency, he's a non-factor as a pass rusher. So, but the Ravens identified him as being valuable in that context as a run-stopping nose tackle. Is that all that valuable in this day and age? Well, the Ravens played 81 snaps on Sunday. Brendan Williams was out there for 40, and 40 is on the higher side of the number of snaps he's played in most weeks. So it really does speak to what the game has become. And again, that's where I have issues with where this front office has been philosophically on certain decisions. So, but you try to identify guys that you're going to build around on that defense right now. And look, the defense is still statistically, and I'm going to keep saying that because I don't want people to think that I'm just saying that this defense is really good and doesn't have its issues. But, you know, for all you want to say about this defense statistically, who are the guys that you identify as pillars you want
top
to
of class?
around?
Who would you pay market money to right now if you had to line them all up and say the guys I want to keep, but I have to pay them among the top 5 or the top, whatever that would be? Do I want to pay C.J. Mosley $18 million a year? Do I want to pay Brandon Williams $12, $13 million a year? At this point, Suggs, Weddle, Jeffrey, go down the line for whatever the top of class would be. How many? Maybe Humphrey, you would say, right?
I think he's the maybe.
But he hasn't gotten on. He's also had some injury issues that have hindered Jimmy Smith, who, quite frankly, I think Jimmy Smith has come a long way as a person, as a leader, as a grown-up, as a guy who stands in front of his locker and acts like a grown-up and has gone through injuries that I think, look, I had a knee surgery in 2006. I never look at an injury the same way again now, right?
Sure.
Like, they're all gruesome. They're all horrible. Watching my wife and what she – just anything where they're taking blood in and out of your body and, going into muscles and tearing things and cutting and snipping things and sewing you back up. That all sounds wonderful out in Middle River or Parkville or Hunt Valley until any of us that have been through it and then trying to go out and run 4-3 again and guard Antonio Brown on a Sunday after having Lee's Frank and, the other issues that have gone on with Jimmy Smith. I have admiration for – I really do at this point because he's not my favorite dude. I don't know him all that well, but I like what he's become as a person. As a player, it's become deteriorating because that's what happens to football players' bodies at 33 for Weddle and 36 for Suggs. And quite frankly, when you've been injured a bunch, as Jimmy Smith has been, and C.J. Mosley, who's been nursing something. Every time I see C.J. Mosley, I go to opening day with C.J. Mosley every year. Little known fact, right? Like, this. Sometimes
sure.
I put a picture up. C.J. and are friendly, and I think a lot of C.J. Mosley as a person. Every year I go to opening day with him. Every year he's got a cast on something. Like, literally. And now we're getting to the point where, we talk about these players getting banged up and, their usefulness is only as useful as their muscles in their bodies. And right now you'd have to say he's a nicked-up guy in the same way that Jimmy Smith is, and you wonder where they're going to be at 31 or 32. Probably not as good a shape as Weddle and Suggs, who've also Suggs especially, the injuries he's gone through, my respect for him as a football player has grown immensely to see what that dude's a warrior, what he's battled through. But it starts to feel at 4 and 5, the coach is on the hot seat. We're going to spend half the next 2 weeks talking about firing and hiring and Flacco and all of that. Then we're discussing these guys individually. We're now in the hard knocks room, right? Like, literally. What is DeCosta and Kokinis and Ozzie, who's, not running the team next year, but his influence is going to be major on this, as well as Bisciotti. What are they saying about all of this to say, where are we going to be when the planes land in Florida, in Jupiter, the 3rd week of January? What do we need this plane to look like next April? Because John and Flacco and Suggs and Weddle might not be on that plane anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's where the rest of this season becomes so interesting. And, we've talked about it already with the context of Joe Flacco versus Lamar Jackson, and at what point do you make that change, not because you're necessarily benching Flacco, but it's because you need to see what you have with Lamar Jackson, and you need to start evaluating. And if you can get 4 starts out of him in the month of December, then that's 4 starts that you have from an evaluation standpoint to start piecing together what this roster is going to look like next year and what it's going to look like the year after that. Because a big part of this piece, Nestor, and we've talked about this before with Philadelphia, with Carson Wentz, and even though Nick Foles was the backup, well, they could afford Nick Foles because they had a quarterback on a rookie contract. And you go down the list of some of these teams. The Rams are a great example right now. Look at all the players that they have on that roster. Why have they been able to do that? Because they have Jared Goff on a rookie contract. Now, that's going to change drastically in a couple years, but if that means you can win a Super Bowl, then by all means you do it. So my point is you have a window with Jackson. We don't know if he's going to be a franchise quarterback or not, but if he is, and you wait, and you go with Flacco another year, and you just decide to prolong that whole inevitability, then that's one less year that you're building what you hope will be a championship caliber roster around Lamar Jackson when he's in his third year, his fourth year, the fifth year option of his rookie contract. But then, if he is a franchise guy, at that point in time, you have to pay him, and that's when you start to have the challenges and the obstacles and the limitations that the Ravens have had because they have had a quarterback on a high-priced contract. And that's the same thing that any team deals with. You have to pick and choose.
Well, these are the benefits of being Jared Goff right now, and and the Philadelphia Eagles and a bunch of other teams that are still working with that. And there's all these decisions about whether the Mariotas and the Winstons and all these names that we were all blossoming about 24, 36 months ago, not named Goff, right, or Deshaun Watson. I mean, Dak Prescott, I remember when he was going to the Hall of Fame too. So, there's all of that going on for the evaluation process for who's going to make what. But the Ravens could probably clear the deck in 9 weeks, right, and have a whole lot of money and a whole lot of DaCosta, if that's the direction they're going in, and a whole lot of new coach and a new whatever to sort of, I don't know, lighten up the blood here come next spring. But in the meantime, they got 7 more weeks of football here and a lot of splaining to do and a lot of football to be played and a direction that is a very awkward and unique direction for this franchise that you and I have never sat around and talked about this direction. And we didn't talk a whole lot about it when Billick got fired either 11 and a half years ago, right?
Yeah, and that's what makes this so awkward because of what we just said. If you had to guess right now, they're going to rebuild. And they're going to cut a bunch of old guys, and they're going to get rid of Flacco, and John Harbaugh's probably gone too, and next year's going to be brand new in that sense, and there are going to be a lot of young players. They're probably not going to be any good, but in the meantime, you have this 4-5 football team with an 11th year head coach and an 11th year quarterback, and your outside linebacker is one of the top 5 players in franchise history, who's in his 16th season.
It is amazing when you take the names and the numbers and the face and and the Super Bowl rings off of it and just describe it, right? Like when you just describe it as a gray, shadow of what your team is and who they are and where they've been. Hey, dude. Patriots are going to go through this, right? Saints are going to go through this. The Bengals, in many eyes, should have gone through this 3 other times, right? The Steelers are going to, the Packers are going to go through this. All of these decorated, even Jason Garrett, who's had all of those parades in Dallas at some point, it'll all come to an end, right? But there has... for as much turmoil as there is in Cleveland and San Francisco and, in Washington and all these other places, these places that have had this consistency have really had a lot of consistency, right?
They have, but the Ravens' consistency has turned into mediocrity, though. That's the problem. And over these last 7 games, and again, I don't expect the Ravens to tank and start Lamar Jackson against Cincinnati. And let me rephrase that. I don't want to say that starting Jackson means you're tanking. But you understand the point I'm making from a standpoint of, all right, you can try to make this one final run and see if you catch lightning in a bottle, and Joe Flacco finds a 3-game stretch where he plays like he did in the 2012 playoffs, but what is that just delaying the inevitable? What are you really getting out of that? Again, are you trying to be the Buffalo Bills getting into the playoffs at 9-7 in the 6th seed? And how's that really helping you beyond that? I mean, I feel like all you're doing at that point is just making your draft pick worse, especially if you're going to blow things up. So it's tough. I mean, and this is where we get into kind of that philosophical argument about tanking. Not necessarily in the NFL per se, although I think the Buffalo Bills have absolutely tanked. But it's tough because you don't really feel that this team, as it's currently constructed, is capable of winning a championship. I don't believe that anymore. And you have all these old guys and veterans and guys.
Isn't that crazy, dude? Like, I came down from the upper deck 2 weeks ago. They're up 10 points, 7 points against the Saints, right? They're going to be 5-2. Literally. I came down and sat next to you, and they were going to be 5-2. And now you don't believe they can win a Super Bowl. I don't believe they can win a Super Bowl at this point. And I don't think Steve Bisciotti believes they can win a Super Bowl. I would think deep down Harbaugh might really believe going to work this week that they can beat Cincinnati next week, which they can, right?
Yeah.
And that they can beat Oakland, which they can.
Either.
So they could be 6-5 here going to Atlanta. I mean, and we'll look back and we'll laugh about it. And I'll say that right now. I'll bust the tape out 2 weeks from now. I believe they can win the next 2 football games, but I don't believe they're running through some combination of, Pittsburgh, New England, Kansas City, whatever it would be in January. And I don't know that they would even get. I don't know that they can be 9-7 at this point, right? I don't really believe they can be 9-7 right now.
Yeah, and you know what's so funny about this? And I'm going to pick on you for just a second here.
Oh, here we go.
I'm not actually picking on you. I'm using you as the example because I think.
Should I get my purple goggles on when you pick on me like this?
No. I think what you just said is the problem with how the Ravens have operated over these last 6 seasons, because you can pick up apart every loss they've had, and we did this in 2013. We did not in 2015,
and find out a way that one play, one tip ball, one kick,
but that's the thing that you kind of convince yourselves that this is better than mediocrity when it's mediocrity. It's not terrible. They're not a bad football team. I want to be very clear about that. And that sounds kind of silly saying that about a team that's lost 3 in a row and 4 of its last 5. I don't believe they're a bad football team. Problem is, I don't think they're a particularly good football team either. They're stuck in the middle. And what you just said as far as where they were in that Saints game and what's happened since then, you could have done the same thing in 2016. Go back and look at that schedule. I guarantee you we can pick out a couple games where you could talk about that. And I'm not just talking about the Christmas Day game. There were some other games where they had a lead or that it was a one-score game, one play here, one play there. Their fortunes are different. They're 10-6 as opposed to 8-8. You could do the same thing last year. Look at some of the games that they lost by one possession. And you keep doing it, and you keep rationalizing going down the same road and not making changes, and you wind up in the same exact place. So I'm not picking on you individually, but I'm really glad you said that, because I feel that what you just said is the same kind of conversations that have gone on internally in that building over the last 5 to 6 years on a number of different occasions. And look, it's really difficult because, and you mentioned this, some of these guys, whether you're talking about character, whether you're talking about perseverance, some of the injuries that have been overcome. John Harbaugh brought this city its second Super Bowl. Joe Flacco brought this city a Super Bowl. There's a lot of sentimentality here, but you know what? When you're at a crossroads where you're not good enough, sentimentality needs to go out the window. And that's not to say you're disrespectful, and that's a reason why I am in agreement with you as far as people that are just saying, fire the coach, fire the coach, fire the coach. I have a long memory, to borrow an expression that Buck Showalter used in his time in Baltimore.
The dearly departed Buck Showalter.
I know John Harbaugh and Joe Flacco and Terrell Suggs and go down the list. Sam Cook, Marshall Yanda. I mean, guys that were here for the most recent Super Bowl. I'll remember those individuals all very fondly, but no one's going to be here forever, and you're really at a point where how much you really getting out of continuing to go forward with this. And if you have a replacement like a Lamar Jackson for Joe Flacco, a maybe. He's a maybe. I don't know if he's going to be their franchise quarterback. Lamar Jackson might end up being a terrible quarterback. I have no idea. I'm not smart enough to know that yet. And lots of teams passed on him on draft night, and that doesn't mean he won't be a great quarterback. And there won't be lots of teams kicking
I don't think there's any
passing
team
him.
out there right now that says, oh, I wish I had him right now. Because they all had that opportunity 5 months ago. And I'm not sure that if the Ravens really believe they had him right now, he would be on the field 2 weeks from now. And certainly Harbaugh in the postgame said all the things that we need to get him on the field more.
Yeah.
And that should tell you that maybe Harbaugh survives all of this. Maybe the Costin, Harbaugh, and Bisciotti are all like, you know, maybe Harbaugh does stay, and that I don't know. I mean, I don't. That is certainly. I know Flacco's not staying. I'll point that out. I mean, Flacco is as good as gone, especially in this offense. I don't think he'll be the quarterback next year. That's my belief.
I don't either at this point.
And I don't think Harbaugh will be the coach either, by the way. Based on the empty seats and based on how Bisciotti sees that part of the business and the booze and the people not coming to a Steelers-Ravens game on a beautiful 58-degree fall day with no wind and, you know, there were a lot of empty seats on Sunday, not even filled by Steeler fans who wanted him. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a league issue, and I see it every week. Yeah. But that really concerns the owner. You know, that's what bothers him. Not keeps him up because he's a freaking billionaire, but that's what bothers him as a competitive guy, as I can't stand empty seats. I don't want pissed off customers, even if they're pissed off because it's black or white or right or left or whatever, but it really is about my team being 4-5, and at the end, if my team were 7-2, those seats would be full. And I think that's how Bisciotti sees it, and that's probably why he's Steve Bisciotti. Luke, I need to take a break here. I need to talk about King Discount Liquors. Lottery beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Get on out to Rosedale and give the King a ring. Check out the new commercial I did with Johnny Bev. If the baseball team allows it to be aired, I should definitely air that out. I had a Free the Bird shirt on. I think they've trademarked it. King Discount Liquors, Pulaski Highway. Hey, when the team's 4-5 and the holidays are here, do what I do. Get some pumpkin spice. Fremont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. We're doing an event with Orlando Brown Jr. 2 weeks from now. Fremont Mortgage is going to be our sponsor. We'll be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry and talking about Zeus's pop, who was a friend of mine and a frequent contributor to the program around here, so I can't think of Zeus without smiling. But Fremont Mortgage sponsors all of our swabbings on behalf of the Bone Marrow Registry and our friends at There Goes My Hero. And while we're at Joe Flacco and my admiration for him, and I'll be writing and talking about him later whenever his tenure here is over, and I certainly hope he gets the ball and goes and beats the Bengals 2 weeks from now and resuscitates the team, as I think is certainly possible, as I've pointed out earlier, but certainly not a Super Bowl in Atlanta. So, you know, I'm in all of that. I took Stoney Case to Amici's in Little Italy on Saturday night. And I haven't talked to Stoney Case in at least a decade, maybe 12 years. But the Pani Rotundo was served. The meatballs were served to Stoney's young lad, Cash. We watched Alabama and LSU. We watched the wackiness of Texas and West Virginia right there in the sports bar on High Street. It's sort of my Fonzie hangout. Anybody that knows me knows I hang out at Amici's in Little Italy. Amici's, just because I like saying that. All right, we're going to come back. Luke and I are getting into it more about the loss to the Steelers, the future, the bye, John Harbaugh, Joe Flacco, Lamar Jackson, Wink Martindale. We're doing all of that out on the internet. You can find this in the Buy at Toyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Our morning newspaper ships directly to your email inbox. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. 5 down, 10 a month. Get inside. It's a little warmer in there, trust me. It's also warm inside Laurel Park and the fantastic sports bar they have down there. Huge TV, wet drinks, great crab cakes, and the ponies on the weekends. My wife is already saying, when are we going back? We had a great time down there a couple weeks ago. Breeders' Cup was this weekend. We will be alerting you to everything, and of course, it's out on the front of WNST.net, as well as in the aforementioned WNST.net morning newspaper. Whew, we got a lot going on around here. Luke's going to be in and around Owings Mills. We're going to try to figure out who's running the Orioles, the Terps, PU. We'll get into that. So we got a lot going on here during the bye week. I'm not going anywhere. I'm sticking around. I will be opining. I'll be out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram. And if there's any massive changes, And I'm waiting for that massive change with the Orioles. Believe me, I'm dying to get into that. Trying to meet John Vitelin. I did pass the Brady Anderson tennis courts and took a picture of that. So I'll be sharing that on our social media. All right, Luke and I are after today and tomorrow and all week long. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.